Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics talking a little Toronto football, but this time we're heading to the north end of the city to talk York Lions. We're going to dive into all the action, some interesting developments with the coaching staff that's come to light of late, all that and much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, my man. I've been really looking forward to speaking about the York Lions because, well, for so many years when I have been doing this, there hasn't been a single shred of positivity that we could really find as a genuine article to say, hey, this is why you should be excited about York. But now there is so much, and we can finally talk about where this direction is going, how we feel about this team, because I'm genuinely excited for the York Lions going into 2025.
And I think much of that excitement, as we discussed, talking about U of T, the parallels run deep with those squads going into year two, the full year of the Dexter Janke experience leading this team. And it was so apparent how he was able to reset that culture. I mean, obviously for these pods, we sometimes have a guest. We came short on this one as well, as we talked about the U of T pod. It sometimes gives us extra leeway. So since we're just on the subject, let's just start by talking about the head man. 1 year in, Dexter Janke comes from out west in terms of his most recent coaching stint, and we've seen the influx of players coming in from the CJFL clubs out in that area, from Edmonton, Okanagan, all these top tier CJFL clubs. York's obviously had the history of bringing in players from the West Coast to begin with. But we see the Dexter Janke era starting off with a bang of, hey, we're taking the decals off the helmet and we're going to earn our stripes. And they bloody got to that mark. I mean, Tom, it's, as you said, sometimes in years past when we talk about York in these types of podcasts, it's not in, the most optimistic of praise. And we've already started off optimistic, but they're the third team we're talking about going in reverse order. Like that's something to say. And so much of that falls on Dexter Janke. What do you think about the impact he's had on the early career for himself as head coach?
I think he's done such an incredible job already just stepping into this role because you can tell from a culture standpoint that this team is different. I mean, everybody, I think, saw some of the pictures and some of the videos that were coming out of some of his team meetings. There's no phones here. When you're here, you're straight and attentive. Everybody has a pen and a notebook. And while to a lot of folks and to a lot of programs, that might seem like that's basic, that's day one stuff, to instill that and to make sure that the entire team is bought into that is a insanely positive thing to be coming out of this. We heard horror stories constantly about previous teams at York and how some guys didn't care, or they weren't doing this or they weren't doing that, or whatever the case may be. And now all of that is worked into, no, we're bought in here. We want to be a part of this team. We want to be a part of this squad. The way that Coach Janke carries himself is something that I've always really respected. And the thing that always comes back to me is you and I went and we caught a game. We caught the home opener against Ottawa.
Yeah.
And we're in the stands and we're sitting there. And one of the parents comes up to us and says, what Coach Janke is doing here has just been incredible. There was a time, I believe it was in training camp, they had an inter-squad scrimmage, and I can't remember which team they were practicing against. But one of the players on the York team scored and they were dancing and celebrating. And Coach Janke grabbed him, threw him on the bench and said, you're not playing for at least another 10 plays because of that. And just kind of instilled this, like, we're going to be better than where we were, but where we were is a part of our history. Let's not forget that and let's build from that. I've loved everything that I've seen so far from this guy.
Totally. And culture is the word you have to talk about because I love the expression that culture doesn't graduate. And we often think about that in terms of a positive culture. When you set good examples of veterans who then teach those young guys who then become the veterans of future generations. But that saying works all the same when it's a more negative culture. As a Toronto guy, guys I knew growing up who would go to York for a year and then they're off doing something else afterwards, just not playing football at all. Don't know what to chalk that up to necessarily, but that's certainly not a positive look on the culture. And all those things you were saying about what Coach Janke did to come in and sort of establish, put his foot down, all that sort of no nonsense attitude, all that while being a guy who will be the first person to put his arm around you. and kind of bring you in and do the big brother type of act, which is so genuine with him in large part because he is the big brother of a former York Lion who was a pretty excellent player there in Jacob Janke. So being able to be in both areas is such a tough thing to manage of not just a leader of a football team, but these are young men, a lot of them fresh out of high school, you're all the experiences of being a student athlete on a university campus for the first time, to have someone who's going to tell you, hey, look, here's how it's going to be, but we're going to love you too. And we're going to make you better. And we're all going to get better. And recognizing that when you give someone a high bar, you're actually doing them the proper service, right? So absolutely fantastic job year one in the books. The bit of recent shuffling of the deck is the news that offensive coordinator Rick Walters has been decided. You have more of the details of it. I think just him wanting to be closer to home. Another person who came in from, I think it was Alberta before he was with York, correct? And that's interesting. I mean, I'm still waiting for my call for that offensive coordinator job with York, but I can understand if they want to go elsewhere. My track record's not stellar. Obviously, it's different when it's someone leaving because of like turmoil or an argument, or I mean, if he just took an offensive coordinator job, if it turns out that Rick Walters ends up being the offensive coordinator somewhere out west, like if that comes to light in the next couple of weeks, we can have this conversation again. But if it's genuinely him just being like, look, far away from home, whatever the story is entirely, that's not that bad a beat, but it's still something that, gosh, there was so much momentum building, positivities that last game at Mac, and a lot of the really good things we saw out of the offense with our guy and Sean Law. The Rick Walters piece of it all. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, once again, to kind of piggyback off of what we were talking about with Coach Janke, I think another huge part of what, to me, proves how important culture is and how incredible of a human being this man is how many people are from out west who decided to come and play at York Lions. Obviously, we talked about all of the CJFL guys. Let's not forget, he was coaching at the West Shore Rebels out in BC. BC to Ontario, it's not just a hop, skip, and a jump away. That's leaving your family, that's leaving your friends, that's starting an entirely new chapter of your life in a region where the only person that you really know, sure, maybe some of the buddies that you have going over there, but it's Coach Janke. And to have that same kind of vibe, like Coach Rick Walters was the offensive coordinator at the University of Alberta Golden Bears, which outstanding name, outstanding program, who the year before in 2023, he took to the Hardy Cup of championship. They ultimately ended up losing that to the UBC Thunderbirds, but still, like, they were right in there. They were a part of these really outstanding program and culture here. So to have that go on is really surprising when you first initially see that, because he's building something and something really impressive at Edmonton, and then to come over to York. And I think once again that speaks to Coach Janke and even Coach Knox, because the two of them served on the same football staff out in the CFL, if memory serves. So it doesn't surprise me that he decided to leave. As far as we know, he decided to leave to go back home, be closer to home. He's a Alberta boy, let's say. I think out in the Edmonton region, that's where his family is, and he just wanted to go back home. That's the word that we're kind of receiving here, which all power to him in that case. Building off of that, obviously, there is a big search right now for the York Lions offensive coordinator here, but honestly, and maybe this transitions, but maybe you want to talk about something else, because there was a new special teams coordinator as well. I think if you're a potential offensive coordinator looking at this York Lions staff, I mean, this looks pretty solid. You have a potential to have Avante McCoy come back and Melkus Alunga come back. Sean Law really started to come alive a little bit. Obviously, he was given his chance later on in the season, but you and I have both said numerous times, and he proves it every single time, there is damn near no one better at throwing the deep ball than Mr. Sean Law. So there's a lot of really positive things going on here for a potential coach to come into.
Yeah, let's stay on the offensive side of the ball, and you read off some of those names, and obviously our dude and Sean Law, and yeah, the deep ball is second to pretty well none. They went off the jump with Matt Lynn coming in from Waterloo, and that very much had the feeling of let's go with the younger quarterback as we try to establish this culture. Lynn got a little banged up, and then all of a sudden you're in a position where, oh wait, we're into the tail end of the season and we're fighting to make the playoffs. And I don't know. It sounded like in the course of the season, there was some rhetoric that we were coming across of people being like pretty oppositional towards the idea that Sean Law would be a good starter. And it's like, we've seen him now in multitude of programs. You talk about having that lack of consistency, his ability to adapt into programs. And yeah, is he better in throwing it 50 plus than he sometimes is on hitting a much more precise route within that 5 to 15? Certainly. But especially when you add in the pieces he has around them. You named off some of those guys, and I think Alunga for sure should be able to come back. Avante is a bit more of a wild card there, but the breakout year of freshman receiver Avery Ford for this group. And I forget his situation. I think was he the one who came from Old Dominion last year? Like big dude from the first game we see, it's like, all right, that guy is it looks a little different. But we also see a guy in Jaron Hardesty have a really good year for them. Listed as a running back, but they lined him up as tight end often. And then our guy from the jump, where we saw Cairo Berry and how electric he was in the return game. I'm guessing our dude in Alfred Olay is probably done at this point because the eligibilities hit 5 and the years of service at the university, I think, are approaching 7. So I'm guessing he's out of there. And again, such a darn shame to see his. You know what? I hope you come back, Olay. I hope 86 is on the field for them because that going out on that injured knee is just such a bad beat. But you have so many great pieces there. Obviously, the O-line play has been something of a point of emphasis where they've needed to improve over the years. But when you look at those pieces, you have a human jugs machine at quarterback. You have immense skill at receiver, running back, tight end, including a receiver who's a big body dude. When you think about offensive coordinators, you don't need to name names, but you just think about what would the type of offense be to take these pieces, and you obviously got to install all the plays and the system and the philosophy. What would be sort of as an archetype of an offensive system that you think would be really fun to see? You're playing Madden, you've loaded up this roster, and you're saying, okay, we're going, 5R, we're going West Coast, we're going whatever it might be. What do you see as the point of emphasis with the chess pieces on the board already?
I think this is a really awesome opportunity to get into the stereotypical run setups the pass, but in the reverse. I think the pass can set up the run here really well, especially with Sean Law, the jugs machine, like we've been saying here, because if he can throw precision balls 30 plus yards, I mean, the one that sticks out in my head is the first touchdown that they scored against McMaster in the final game of the season. The back shoulder throw to Sean Avery in the end zone in between two different MAC defenders. Like that was unbelievable. And the touch that he has on that, if he can consistently hit those kind of balls like we've seen consistently throughout the entire year, that forces your defensive box to make sure that you're not crowding in, that you have some more support here, because very easily what's a great setup off of a streak or even an out and up from something like that? Well, here's a comeback route, or here's break that off as a 15-yard in. And if you don't have a linebacker that's going to stay back and try to defend that deep third, or at least the deep second, let's say, I think that area becomes wide open now. And so you force guys to stay out of the box to try to cover more area here. And that sets up draw plays, that sets up run plays, and that really goes a long way into getting your run game established here so that you help out your receivers and you help out your quarterback. To me, I'm really interested to see here the growth of Sean Law. I don't think, well, you and I have had a lot of conversations about what happened at Guelph when he happened to be there and everything else. I don't know how much development was going on there. And then obviously he leaves there, he goes to UBC and is a part of an incredible program, but obviously because of the transfer year, he's not able to actually play himself. So I don't know how much time he actually gets to really rep in at UBC. Whereas now he's been at York and he was repping at York. Sure, he didn't get the start until the later half of the season, but he's got some chemistry with these guys here. If he walks in there as QB1 and really starts to get jamming with the receivers that are there, gets on an even better page with Avery Ford and get things going here, I think that we could see a very big improvement from Sean. And I think that there's a lot of upside for him, certainly here. I'm very impressed, even just with the numbers here. Like we mentioned, I think he only started in the last 3 games of the season, I want to say, but his numbers in the regular season here, 69 for 117, 59% completion, 896 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I mean, he establishes himself pretty early on with what he's able to do in a lot of these games here. And I'm once again, you mentioned it previously. We had a few people come up to us during the season saying, "Hey, we're kind of surprised that you said that Sean Law was going to be this guy. Like we weren't really sure, like whatever else." And then going into the later part of the season, we kind of saw, he had his opportunity. He was able to do his thing. So I don't know. There's been a lot of people who, in my opinion, have been sleeping on Sean Law, and I still have faith in the kid. I still think that his ceiling is pretty high up, and especially with all of the different pieces that you just listed off as potentials for him to throw to or hand the ball off to. Man, I really think that this York Line offense has the potential to be really damn good.
100%. And you mentioned like with him moving around, you're not able to get into that rhythm as much. And I'm thinking as you're saying that, well, that might very well explain why when you watch him on Saturdays, seemingly is better at the deep ball than those short routes, because having a connection with a receiver when you know that your guy pushes a little deeper on those 5 yard outs, or when your guy is going to stem in and or stem out then in before his slant, is so crucial for having an effective short game. When you can just throw it all the way down the field, all right, every now and then your guy's going to beat his man, get past him, and then you're going to the crib. So, frankly, I think there's a way to even be even more generous and just say that, like, those rhythm throws, emphasis on rhythm, are lacking because he's been lacking in the rhythm from moving around different programs. And again, we don't have to go into the genesis of that when he was at Guelph and the tumultuous nature of that. But I love your read on the offense and what they can do with it, because you think too about guys like Avante McCoy and Melkus, certainly Avante more so, of you can start them in the backfield or starting with Avante specifically, and then you can bump him out as a true receiver. You can have him coming right back through, getting jet motions, everything like this. Melkus a little bit has that versatility, but certainly with Avante, and just again, we were seeing Coach Walters start to use a lot of that movement with all these pieces. So again, it's frustrating to think they're gonna have to reset to some form or fashion from that. But like this, I have to imagine if you're a free agent OC out there, or a positional coach on another team who's been waiting to make that leap, like I'm very curious what this process has been like in terms of the names of people who've been applying, because it's I think it's a great time. You're on the ground floor of something that could be really good. Now, Tom, let's segue to the other side of the ball, because you were mentioning when with this offense and with this talent, when you can spread out teams, you can use the pass to set up the run, get a linebacker on a very unfortunate mismatch with an Avante McCoy type or one of these great receivers they have. And you're saying a lot of teams don't have the linebackers to deal with that. You know who do have linebackers that could probably deal with that? These frickin' York Lions, man. Because, like, let's be real. The dynamic duo of Brody Clark and Peyton Ryder is like something supremely special. Like, not to be hyperbolic, but we got to see a really great year of linebacking play 2 years back, thinking about guys like James Peter and Max Charbonneau right next to him in Ottawa. I don't want to put these guys on that pedestal. And we've seen some great linebacking play, like a decade straight from, the Western Mustangs, right? With all those guys that have been in there, Riley McLeod, Max Nixon, and all these dudes in there, right? This is a duo that, like, I feel like if we didn't get to that point, another year watching these two, that's the conversation that we're having, where as a duo, they're as dominant in the middle of the box as, I don't want to be too aggressive on the take, because I want to go through the other rosters and remind myself of who the competition is. But like, we're talking about probably as good a duo in the middle as a lot of teams can put out there.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. When you even just to look at the stats on the season here, the number one tackler in the OUA last year was Brody Clark with 61 tackles. And let's not forget, he was injured, so he only played in 7 of the 8 games. The number 2 tackler right behind him, that'd be Peyton Ryder with 55 and a half tackles, which outstanding number, Peyton, my man.
Well
But
done, sir.
when you look at this, both of these guys were second team OUA All Stars, and you're thinking, oh my gosh. And then you realize, okay, well, it's Justin Pace ahead of them, it's Riley McLeod ahead of them, and then it's Anthony Moore
Tuzo.
Tuzo
Love
ahead
that.
of them, which those are all Canadian caliber linebackers in front
Yeah.
of them. And let's not forget, this is Brody Clark and Peyton Ryder's first year in a Greg Knox defense, and they're putting up numbers like this. Now, you start to say, hey, that's a lot of tackles for these dudes and what's happening here. What we really saw, especially going into the end of the season here, were the defensive line for the York Lions, they are eating up offensive linemen. They are taking down double teams, even if they can't. I've seen guys submarine at certain times to really make sure that they're, cutting knees down, doing whatever they have to do to keep their linebackers free. And even if you do get an offensive lineman up there with how hard Peyton Ryder hits as a middle linebacker, there's no guarantee that you just block this man just because you got your hands on him. He is a strong dude. I've seen him bench press guys off. So, of this entire team, when we were watching them last year, and York is known for having some outstanding athletes in all positions, there are no two people that impress me more than Brody Clark and Peyton Ryder.
Yeah, I'm aware Greg Knox defensive linemen sink double teams. Same dang cheap crap you guys pulled at Mac. Take on a double team. Come on. Play football. Oh, but you guys can cut block. Give me a break. Give me a break.
Somehow
Oh,
it
no, you
always comes
pancaked
back
me.
to your trauma against McMaster, eh?
The few times I've had the honor of meeting Greg Knox since this season started, he still scares the pants off me. But you know what? Still talking about these dudes and thinking about his defenses, one of the first things that we clued into about Brody Clark is that he's playing that vaunted Sam linebacker position for Greg Knox's defense. And though it's not exclusive to Nick Shorthill, it's certainly a nice name to invoke in thinking about people who excelled in that position. And much like we talked with Coach McNeil about a couple weeks ago, as you said, going into year two with a Knox defense just means you're diving that much deeper into the playbook, the terminology sound, and yeah, it's a great duo and some great guys on the back end too. We saw a really good year from a guy in Raekwon Lewis. Gibbs is really nice in the back end. Kirill Niari, I think, stepped in a bit for Brody Clark because he got a bit injured as well, and he was looking really good. Some really good guys in that defense. Tom, let's take a look now, though, because you're mentioning the eligibility of Clark and Ryder. We can keep the conversation going about these guys, but as we often do with these conversations, we've mentioned a few of the names already. It's worthwhile in this way, way, way too early exit meeting that we're doing and taking a look at next year. Let's look at some of the eligibility of these guys, and that'll perhaps help us segue into the CFL combine of it all. When we look at fifth-year eligibility, guys, we're seeing the name of Alfred Olay, as we already mentioned, Jeremy Asifo on the defensive line, Matthew K. Mitchell, defensive back. So those are the fifth-year eligibility guys that I think are safe bets who won't be returning. The fourth years, we're seeing the names, the likes of guys like Avante McCoy, Malachi Morrison, Evan Guizo, Sean Law, Xavier Carrera on the offensive line, Alil Azrak on the offensive line, Evan Anisu on the offensive line. Peyton Ryder's listed fourth-year eligibility on their website, as is Brandon Davies Lyons, who we saw make the move from D-line to O-line, Sterling May, and Theo Brown also on that D-line listed fourth year. Brody Clark listed fourth year as well on here as well. A few other names, but trying to go through them all. Point being, and obviously we can look at the youth as well, and that's worthwhile. Some notable names, some very notable names in there, which could mean one of two things. Especially when you look at the likes of guys like Carrera and NCU. I don't know if I've ever pronounced your name right, Evan, and I don't know if I'm going to be starting on this pod. I apologize. I also think we met your brother in the stands of one of the York games, part of a ruckus group of fellas having a good time at a York game. But we look at, two veterans on the O-line, a couple veterans on the D-line, linebacking core, all across the board. Again, fourth year is never a bet, never a safe bet, I should say, but it puts you in that gray area. When you think about those names, maybe we want to transition to the CFL Combine roster invites. The Invitational combine invites. What stands out to you when you look at some of that veteran depth?
Well, it's really interesting when you start thinking about some of the veteran depth here because there's a lot of guys who have been a part of some very tough years with the York Lions and have still, despite that, showcased a lot of heart, a lot of talent, and a lot of capabilities here. And one of the guys, obviously, we talked about Avante McCoy and a few other the offensive guys. The one guy that really sticks out to me is Brandon Davies Lyons. I mean, he was a stalwart defensive lineman, makes the switch over to the offensive line. I'm sure to probably help himself in the CFL combine. It's a lot more appealing as an offensive lineman than a defensive lineman, whatever. But more than anything, that's helping out his team. That's solidifying a spot on that offensive line that has struggled at times, certainly in the past few years, and really helped them to establish a little bit more. So I've really been impressed with him. Obviously, Brandon Davies Lyons, Avante McCoy, and CJ Vincent are all guys who have been invited to the Waterloo Invitational Combine that's going to be happening later this month. So lots of really exciting things going on from that standpoint. But when you start to think about some of the other guys in there, obviously Peyton Ryder is a massive one. Would love to have that guy in here as his first year, but with the CJFL rules of eligibility, he probably only has one more year left in him. I would imagine he comes back and wants to be a part of this as well, at least for as long as he possibly can. But there's a lot of stalwart names that we've known about the York Lions previously that you and I have really associated as, the few bright spots that's been a part of this team during a lot of the struggles that are happening here. And now I think that they're making way for some of the new blood that's going to be coming in here. They're already starting to list a number of recruits that are committed to York. There's a number of guys who are from out west, or even certain transfers from a couple of other universities as well who want to be a part of this. So I think that while anytime you lose veteran presence going into this is obviously it can be a backbreaker for any team. I think for the York Lions, they are in a specific new phase here, especially A, because of the new coaching staff, and B, now there's a brand new offensive coordinator who I'm sure will be announced in the next few weeks or however long it takes for them to find them, and a new special teams coordinator. So even more of an opportunity for folks to come in and to prove themselves and to earn a starting spot and to come whatever. So I think York is in a very unique situation here where losing some of the veteran leadership may not all be bad from this standpoint.
Yeah, and I think it's all part of that culture piece too, right? Even if it's a year, 2 years with someone who brings in that, again, thinking about some of these programs like the West Shore Rebels, like the Okanagan Sun, these types of teams that have that established culture there. You're bringing that in under Coach Janke. He obviously has that familiarity from being out there, and when you play the long game of it all, I think it all shines very bright. Just to go over those names again, they have three players going to the invitational combine, not the national combine itself, but it is Brandon Davies Lyons, as you discussed. He's listed as a D lineman though on the CFL website. That's interesting. Wouldn't put it past that's just an error on their part. I don't know. Our guy Avante McCoy listed as receiver. I kind of dig it, right? Again, jack of all trades. And then CJ Vincent. CJ Vincent. Looks like a West Shore Rebel guy that came in. I don't know, as a wide receiver. I don't know if he actually played for them last year. Maybe he was injured. I don't see him as recording a stat for them on offense at receiver. So don't quite know what the deal is there. He is on the roster page. He's a third-year player out of Moose Jaw. Shout out to the Prairies there. Which again, obviously, if he's someone who's got the attention of the scouts from clearly his time in the CGFL and then missed a year playing for whatever reason, I don't know what's going on, but clearly healthy enough to go to this combine, just another name now we could factor into a potentially potent offense, even more potent offense, as we were already discussing. So, it'll be very interesting to see how that event goes in at the time of recording, just over a week's time out in Waterloo. Tom, certainly a number of other things that we can talk about, will talk about. Want to make sure to take a moment, if for no other reason, because his parents are very nice individuals, and I'm certain they're listening to this to shout out the punter Nathan Walker, who had
Hmm.
himself a heck of a year kicking the heck of that ball, averaging the 43 yards in the air there. So you know what? Punters, long snappers, kickers of all kind, people too in my books. Um, Tom, where else do we want to go with the York breakdown here?
Well, I think you beautifully kind of segued into the special teams coordinator that is brand new to the York Lions here by the name of Eli Haynes. He comes from the CJFL once again, from the Okanagan Sun to be specific. And for those of you who don't know, the Okanagan Sun are one of the most uh, successful programs in CJFL history with how well they've been doing things. Are constantly in the championship as they were just this past year as well. But I really think that he's going to bring another layer to this as well. If nothing else, obviously I think he's proven himself as a solid coach being with the Okanagan Sun. But if nothing else, this is another lifeline to out west to start pulling from more guys from the CJFL and just from Western Canada in general, because there are some monsters that are out there. And I think this is going to really add in nicely to the entirety of the Coach Janke culture aspect that gets into things here. I can confidently tell you, based on my conversations with some of my teammates on the defensive side of the ball, Greg Knox inspires a ton of confidence and culture. People love playing for the guy, especially when you start to understand at least aspects of the mad scientist defensive schemes that he's got going on. You start looking at guys who have been insanely successful, like your Mike Daly's, your Stephen Treskas, these guys who played on those all-star defenses that we had at McMaster and just loved the guy and wish nothing but the best for him. So Eli Haynes combined with Coach Knox and Coach Janke here to really bring up the overall culture of this team. I think once again, you can't stop hyping up the importance of culture on any team. It's what gets guys to buy in. It's what gets guys to go the extra mile. Those 6 a.m. lifts that you have before practice or before class, those can be absolutely brutal. But if you believe in the culture, if you believe in the mission of what your team is about, they get a lot easier to wake up rather than, what, I don't know where this team's going to go. I don't know what's happening here. I think all of that is now done, and I'm really excited for where this team could potentially go.
Well, let's take a look at where they potentially could go. And we
Mm.
haven't even talked about last year in terms of the actual games on the field. As a reminder, it was a 2-6 season that came down to the wire as this team duked it out with McMaster from Hamilton with a winner go home stake on the line. How they got there, though, is super intriguing because they started the year off, as you mentioned, hosting Ottawa, a game that we were at. We ended up going to what? 3, 4 York games this year, something like that. You
Mhm.
weren't at the
Mhm.
Toronto game, though. I know you could make it to that one, but a game that had Ottawa up 7-4 at halftime. Ottawa then picks it up in the second half. Ottawa, for those who can't remember, we'll be talking about them in a few weeks, is a team that struggled offensively, specifically at the start of the year in the passing game, trying to figure out their quarterback situation. Queens takes it to them, Windsor takes it to them, then Ballot Toronto, the exciting finish on that one, 19-17, picking up the win and earning their first stripe. Then they lose to Carleton on the road, mind you, a game that's 7-7 at the half. Again, Carleton, what the heck were we doing last year? Carleton picks up the win 24-10 nonetheless. The following week, they're home, their homecoming game against Waterloo. The offense comes alive. That's the 39-24 shootout, if you will. They earn the second stripe. They then lose to Guelph the following week at home as well. Night game, Friday night game, I believe, if memory serves, and just a game where that Guelph offense just exploded all over the field. It was really just pouring it on, especially in that second quarter. And then they close out losing 24-1 against Mac. And so, you look at the season and sure, that U of T game could have gone either way. Ultimately, a bounce here, a bounce there. The big Avante McCoy run doesn't happen. That Waterloo game, again, the final score looks pretty nice, but that's 15 points to nothing in the fourth quarter for York. So obviously you can look at the two wins and say that they could go either way, but this is a York team that was certainly in ball games with some very talented teams throughout this year. I want to ask you about this season as far as the games on the field. And then, we talked about it a little bit on the UFT pod, just sort of putting York and Waterloo and Mac and UFT in kind of that, kind of bottom tier right now from where we sit way too far. How'd you feel about the year on the field against these opponents? Where you sort of was your gut at right now looking at 2025?
Well, the thing that I think I was really excited about, and obviously it could certainly we talked about it going into this, but it was awesome to really see, is that in a number of these losses, that defense gave them every opportunity to get things going. I think especially this offense really took its time in order to try to find itself. I mean, I remember being at that home opener against Ottawa with you, and at one point it's like 9-4 or something like that in the
Ugly.
first quarter, and it was rough certainly here. But you and I are looking at each other like, man, York has every opportunity to win this game, to be in this. It's just one big play away, one big whatever. And obviously, it's the very first game for them. It's a new offensive coordinator, it's brand new coach, new lifestyle, new culture, new everything. So that's always really difficult here. But even looking down, I mean, a Windsor squad that's outstanding. You only lose 29-0. Once again, offense needs to be there, but every opportunity to be in that game. A Toronto squad that we saw has the capabilities for an explosive offense. Certainly in the first game against Waterloo, that's where they get their first win. They hold that offense to just 17 points here. You talked about Carleton and how close that game was. So the defense really stood up to me in this one. And I do want to say that the second win of the season here, where they score the most amount of points, is when Sean Law takes over. Now, I don't
Yep.
want to say anything against Matt Lynn by any means. Obviously, he struggled at times, really trying to find himself and going up against some of the outstanding defenses like Ottawa has, like Queens has, like Windsor has. Even the last game of the season, Carleton. We talk about all of the offensive whatever, but the defensive backfield with guys like Ottman, Braun, and the rest of that outstanding defensive secondary, it can be tough. But he goes into the Waterloo game, and you see Sean Law 26 for 40, 271 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks.
Mm.
And you go, this is why we were so high on the guy. This is why we think he can really do what he can. And he continued to have pretty solid numbers throughout the remainder of that year. Obviously, going into the Guelph game, that's a very tough opponent. That's a very good Guelph squad, especially going into this year. But still, 18 for 33, 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Like those are solid numbers going up against a very talented and good Guelph Griffin defense. So I think that if this mentality of this defense for York continues the way that it's going, where it's not even necessarily just the idea of like, oh, it's Greg Knox defense, he's going to blow out everybody, they're not going to score a single point. No, but you're going to have opportunities. This defense is going to create opportunities for you, whether that means turnovers or whether that just means holding a team to 3 points instead of 7. You're going to get opportunities to really come back in this one, as we saw in the majority of this year from that defense. And I think if this offense can really find a rhythm and get going here, that's why I'm so excited about the potential of where York can be.
Most definitely. And even that Windsor game, as you were mentioning, I think it was something like 9-0 at the half. So, that defense, as you mentioned, was holding them in these games. And, again, kind of hard not to go back to that piece as we talked about with momentum that you built with the offensive coordinator and Coach Walters, now having to rebuild that. But we won't repeat on that one. We'll just move forward. Tom, we kind of put them in that tier, as we said, at the bottom when you just look around the league. So looking at those squads, you say, okay, can you we don't even know the schedule yet, right? We'll probably repeat this conversation when that drops in maybe another couple months time. But you look at, okay, if you get Mac, if you get U of T, well, you'll definitely get U of T. If you get Waterloo on the schedule, take care of business against those three. Again, that doesn't quite put you in the position to make that next jump that you need to get into the playoffs, barring again, it was a weird year where you had a really good Carleton team that had a poor record. What is growth for this York team going into 2025 from where we sit right now?
Honestly, I mean, we talked about, they were in the tier of winning isn't everything and whatever else, and I still very much believe that. Now this year, with everything that you've showcased, with the potential that you have, I expect playoffs. I expect this York
Okay.
team to make the playoffs this year and to, that means stepping on a few other teams here in order to get there. But I think that's where this team has the potential of doing. Whether they just scrape in or whether they get the number 6 versus the number 7, whatever the case, I think that you have established yourself. And I think the expectation here is we're going to make the playoffs this year for the first time in a very long time for the York Lions. And obviously, I think that you and I were talking about the potential of these kind of the bottom tier, at least from where we finished last year going into this. I think you've got to win against the Waterloos, the U of T's, and as much as I hate to say it, the McMasters of the world here to get that 3-0 against those four. And I think if you steal one from the remainder of the OUA, which in my opinion is very doable. We just talked about some of the very close games against some very good caliber teams who are also going to be losing a lot of some of their key players in certain areas. And obviously we'll get into that as we continue on with these exit meeting interviews. I don't think it's unrealistic to say that this York team could go from 2-6 to 4-4 and get into a decent enough spot in the playoffs to really try to make a push.
Well, and again, all the while, 3-5, though they just missed it this year. Again, with the wins coming against the right people, almost got you in. So who knows how the cards are going to, be distributed? Who knows how it's all going to break out? We are sitting here in the middle of February, in the midst of, I'm assuming Hamilton got hit with the same crazy snow that Toronto's
Oh
been hit
gosh.
with. So to everyone listening, hopefully you're doing all right from that standpoint. Tom, fantastic job by you as always. Love talking to you a little York Line football, Toronto football in general, as we've always said, is what helps U Sport football as a whole product really thrive. And right now, it's a great time to be supporting these two clubs that we're coming back to back off of. Tom, any last thoughts, last words about the York Lions as we go into 2025 here or continue
Yeah,
into
I know we
2025?
started with it. I know we've talked about it a whole bunch. My God, is it nice to talk positively about the York Lions again, to say that there's a hope and there's a future for this team where you and I have been going into this for the past couple of seasons before 2024 and being like, well, yeah, I think they're going to suit up and it's going to be rough. Now it's like, it's not just, hey, I think we're going to win a couple of games here. I just said it, but the expectation now is you make the playoffs. The expectation is that you win some of those close games and you start to establish yourself as that dangerous team to really look at here. And my God, is it nice to see for the York Lions because, as we have said numerous times, if Toronto football is succeeding, OUA football is succeeding. So really excited to see the York Lions get back to form from a very long time ago and try to establish themselves as that perennial playoff team.
Amen. Well, we'll be going from the province's capital to the nation's capital for our next exit meeting interview, where we will be talking a little Carleton Ravens football and all the excitement that is going on there when you talk about coordinator shuffling. So we'll be talking little Ravens football right here at the 55.